What is up, fellow starlings? Welcome to a Stargirl Season 3 video. I suppose you could call this the first Stargirl Season 3 video, but also in part a Stargirl Season 2 video, in that we are going to get into all the nitty-gritty details of what those little setups were for the next season ahead, with the finale of Stargirl Season 2 introducing, well, not necessarily introducing, but teasing a much larger plan from Mr. Bones. We have teasers from Solomon Grundy, the title card for next season being frenemies, the shade staying. What does that mean? What could that mean for Stargirl in Season 3? Of course, we have Icicle Jr. and what might unfold there, on top of Obsidian, aka Jenny's brother, Todd, returning, probably, for next... There's just so much to talk about, so here's a little bit of a Stargirl bonus video for you. And by the way, if you watch Doom Patrol, even if you might not watch Doom Patrol, you might enjoy my interview that I did with Javan Wade, who plays Cyborg, a live-action Cyborg in Doom Patrol. And if you don't watch Doom Patrol, seriously... I'm speechless. That should just say it all. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to start off with frenemies being the title card for next season. As it may sound a little bit cheesy for some, more than others, but it probably is more cheesy than what it will actually be. And this was all started with the tease that came after Sportsmaster and Tigress knocking on the door to Stargirl's home, and Pat answered it, and of course the family was there, with Artemis included, and they've moved it in the neighborhood right next door. And this is interesting because, you know, I think a lot of us did come to enjoy the Pat and Crusher scenes and the little comedic moments between them, how that went across the first couple of seasons. So you can tell what frenemies is getting into, not to mention Mr. Bones also referenced with Dr. Louise Love at the very ending scene, with how there's supervillains and heroes in Blue Valley living amongst each other, and how that will be an interesting experiment. So he's interested to see that, but this also speaks into larger things like Cindy possibly joining the JSA and maybe going on a little bit of a redemptive arc. So you see where I'm going with this. Frenemies speaks larger to that of just the Crusher and Tigress scene right at the end. It's probably going to be this interesting dynamic that plays forward next season with a bunch of characters, like the Shade as well. Like, I know the Shade isn't an outright villain, that's obviously been established, and I've been saying that ever since he was cast in Season 2. So you see how this will go into next season, the fun that they're going to play with a little bit, but I wouldn't read into it too much because, you know, the title card for Season 2 was Summer School, and it's not like Summer School was a massive theme in the season, so I'm looking forward to that. The only thing I'm thinking, though, with regards to Sportsmaster and Tigress, is like they were in jail, and they were probably in jail for a long time, so I felt like them coming out, moving back in as convicted felons, it regresses a little bit of that speech that Crusher and Tigress gave Artemis. Do you remember, like, they went back to jail for their daughter to try and be a better influence, but yet now they're out. So I hope they do explain that, otherwise that would be a little bit weird. Like, I guess they've just broken out and they've bought a house and we're just meant to forget about, like, they're meant to be in prison. But either way, moving onwards to Mr. Bones. Mr. Bones, what a tease for next season. This is one of the things I love most about Stargirl, and I even said this in my review. They are very, very comic book accurate, down to the level of what might be deemed as cheesy for some people to bring into modern day, but they put a lot of the Golden Age stuff into their show. Like, even little bits like, you know, Clifford DeVoe's Thinker, when we saw the JSA files on him, and, you know, we saw the little mugshot photo. It was a bit more of a Nubia version, if you will, of the Clifford DeVoe from the early days of his appearances in DC Comics. But you see what I mean, and that translates to everything, and including the accuracy here with Mr. Bones. But as I always say, things aren't copy and paste in live action adaptations, hence the key word being adaptation. You know, we're adapting these characters and storylines from the comics with a bit of innovation. So with Mr. Bones, I have already explained him roughly in my reviews, but for those of you who have missed it, essentially in the comics, he isn't like all that bad. Like, he really isn't. He has had somewhat of a super villainous path before, but it's still, his origin is something that is fairly interesting into what made him to be the person he is today, and where he kind of ends up in the comics is more of the grandfather role, likened to that of Nick Fury, if you will, for Marvel, in a very vague sense. So one thing I was very happy about when we first heard the voice is that he was voiced by Keith David. Now, for me, I mean, I've heard him in a bunch of things on screen, but it's also the video game side, such as Mass Effect, if any of you have played that, with of Anderson or Halo, the Arbiter. Like, he voiced the Arbiter, so his voice... He's got a very prestigious voice acting voice, if that even makes sense. Like, to the point of where you always recognize this guy from somewhere. So him playing Mr. Bones, I feel it's going to add this gravity to the role, which I think we're all going to love. But as I was saying, back into the actual character, as you can tell, his skin is very transparent, translucent. So he does actually have skin. He has eyelids, eyeballs, and all of that. But since it's so transparent, you see his skull and his skeletal structure if he was naked, if you know what I mean. So you can tell how he got the name Mr. Bones. They made a big point as when the camera was panning from behind him that he's wearing his gloves because his touch is known as this cyanide touch. And if you know what cyanide is, then you wouldn't want to come into contact with that because you'll basically die. So Mr. Bones in the source material was a part of a bunch of kids of whom's mothers, when pregnant, were injected with this experimental drug, which in turn, when they popped out their babies, including Mr. Bones being one of them, they were born with metahuman abilities. But the thing is, the guy who experimented upon the mothers who bore the children of the Helix group in the comics, one of them being Mr. Bones, was Dr. Benjamin Love. Now we know from Stargirl, hence what I always say with adaptations, that nurse at the end of the Helix Institute was Dr. Louise Love. Now, just judging by the fact that Mr. Bones is already, like, much older, I'm guessing that this is his daughter, and they're just giving some kind of adaptation-y spin on it like that. So I wouldn't really read too deep into that. I'm sure she's just a reference to the guy who actually, you know, injected the women who gave birth to the children. And the other children, by the way, on top of Mr. Bones, were Penny Dreadful, Baby Boom, Critter, Arak the Windwalker, and Tal Jones. I hope I didn't butcher any of those names. As for if all of those other metahumans will appear, I don't know. They are somewhat from the more wackier days of the comics, you know, in a very charming way, but I mainly think that this will be adapting Mr. Bones and his little enterprise that he's got going on here. I don't expect to necessarily see all of the other gifted kids, if you know what I mean, from the Helix group that they went on to create. Those kids themselves were very introverted when they grew up. They learned everything they knew from the TV, Mr. Bones included. They went on to form Helix, but we could have references to them, Easter eggs, maybe one like Penny Dreadful will appear, but you see where I'm going with this. I don't expect all of them to appear. Now, those kids founded the Helix group. Now, in Stargirl, it's like they're older and the Helix group is this big home, if you know what I mean. And this is where I feel like I'm vibing what they might be doing, especially with the title of what this place is, and that is the Helix Institute for Youth Rehabilitation. So I kind of look at it in a way of like a slightly more twisted, you know, Charles Xavier's school for gifted youngsters or whatever. You know what I mean? As I said, Mr. Bones, kind of likened to that of the Shade, even though the Shade is probably a little less shady in a sense, isn't all out villainous. However, I do think that this youth rehabilitation center is exactly what you're thinking, with people like Todd having already been in there, maybe other gifted kids, maybe they try and take advantage of them, maybe they're trying to recruit them for something larger to fit their own agenda. Who really knows? Maybe they're gonna make him out to be slightly extra villainous, with maybe conducting his own experiments to further enhance existing children in the rehabilitation center. This is what I mean by adaptations. You can't always guess exactly what they might do with this iteration of Mr. Bones, even though we've got a lot of familiar source material stuff to play with here. What we do know, thanks to Louise Love, who you may recognize as Polka Dot Man's mum from the Suicide Squad, I don't know if any of you caught that, is that we had her tell Mr. Bones about Jenny and how she found other superheroes in Blue Valley, along with supervillains, so he's intrigued by all of this, with them living side by side, and it'll be an interesting experiment, and they want to take that trip to Blue Valley. We know that Jenny did go to this institute. Courtney and Pat arrived and took her from there, having been in search for Todd, who had already been there, and she said that Todd ran away. Now, did he run away? Or is Mr. Bones and Dr. Louise Love there already kind of, or Nurse Louise Love or whatever, taking advantage of Todd and he's just run away, but maybe they're just capitalizing upon his obsidian powers and this could be the origin of him in Stargirl's iteration? Or maybe he did honestly go and escape this youth rehabilitation center, Helix, to go and find his sister. All of this is still yet to be seen, but, you know, talking of Todd, that's another season 3 thing in of itself. We are for for sure gonna see him. Like, I'm very confident about that. And as you guys know, Jenny's brother is obsidian in the comics, and his powers come from the Shadowlands just like the Shades, hence why you can probably tell Jonathan Cake will likely, very, very likely, with that tease of what we got with Rick and Solomon Grundy burying the body, that he will be reprising his role next season. Now, with Obsidian, this is the interesting thing, and, you know, all of these points coincide together with what we were talking about, the Helix Institute for Youth Rehabilitation, Mr. Bones. I am wondering if when Todd is introduced, it will be a bit of like a side plot of him perhaps going down the evil route of what he has done before in the comics, which obviously makes it all the more useful for the Shade to be around. You know, somebody very familiar, somebody who's been around since the 1800s with such expertise of the Shadowland powers that he might be able to reel Todd in a bit and maybe be a mentor for Obsidian when he perhaps comes around. The same can be said for Starman, you know, with Stargirl next season, and maybe even Beth Chapel with the new Dr. Midnight, although he seems to have been a little bit written out. But you can see how maybe next season we are getting a little bit more training from some of the older and more expertised members of not just the JSA, but the ISA, and just the superhero world in general. Now, Todd does struggle from mental health issues, which is somewhat what delved him down a bit of that villainous path in the source material, and I believe he attempted to use some of his Shadowland powers in an effort to spread darkness all over the world. Now, I'm not saying season 3 is going to aspire to have a Todd storyline go that big and bad, but you can see where I'm going with this. He might be suffering from mental health. When Jenny finds him, he might be like also trying to get used to his powers. They might be coming out more, just like Jenny's has last season. So you see where this can go for Todd, and how obviously that there's quite a bit of rich story to go with there, especially with the Shade being around. And all I want next season with regards to this is more Green Lantern. Like, season 2 was good, but it was also slow in areas that you could tell they didn't want to necessarily bring in the forefront, because perhaps they couldn't utilize it as much as they wanted to, perhaps for some low-key budget reasons. I can go into this more in another video, but for sure, it did feel like there were slight more limitations compared to that of what they could pour in with season 1, and I'm just hoping that we do get a bit more capitalization on Green Lantern and some of the more powery side of things next year. The next thing we need to discuss is Starman. The slowest burn I think I've ever experienced in any show with regards to a character being teased at the end of season 1, if you think about it, to only have like, what, a couple of scenes in season 2. I do say that tongue-in-cheek at the same time. So Starman, you know, there's so many things we can get into with this. Like, first of all, I want more Cosmic Staff lore. That should be coming. It should be, because obviously Sylvester coming back, whether this is Sylvester, which I think it is, you know, I think a lot of us are assuming it is the original Starman. It's just that how did he survive? And not only that, he is obviously going to train Stargirl. He did tease he's going to show her more things that she can do with the staff. I think another thing that will be happening next season is perhaps Pat and Starman might be knocking heads, compared to that of the relationship they once had of mentor and sidekick. We can't forget that was many years ago, and I'm not saying they're gonna be like adversaries or anything like that, proper versing each other. I'm just saying this was foreshadowed for sure when Sylvester said, like, superheroes don't need school, and you saw Pat's response to that. I just feel like Pat has slightly evolved from the stripesy kind of bitch boy that Starman treated him as. And I say that, like, very bluntly, because you guys have seen the flashbacks. Hey, yeah, Pat, let the members ask the questions. To Jay Garrick, do you remember at the funeral? Like, that was consistent. As much love as Sylvester had for Pat, it was definitely like this weird hierarchy that I think a lot of us don't agree with. So that is definitely, Pat has evolved from then. And, you know, with the thing I just mentioned, I think there might be a low-key difference of opinion with Sylvester. As much as what fun and expertise he will bring to Courtney next season, I feel like directions from Barbara and Pat versus Sylvester's directions for Courtney might differ a little bit. But I'm looking forward to that. And, of course, just in of itself, you know, we have to find out what's happened, where he's been, and I'm just imploring the show to get a bit more into Ted Knight, the origin of the staff, and all of that. Some people are saying, you know, what if Sylvester is coming back because of a crisis change, and he's been alive all along, but the logic surrounding that is a bit hazy. For example, if that was the case, then Pat would technically know all along, because this is how post-crisis changes work. The general population of the world, or even characters close to said character who had a post-crisis change, if you're still with me here, have always known that change to be the original thing all along. So let's say there was a change from pre-crisis to post-crisis. Those other people surrounding the change will have always known that change to be the original thing. There was no change for them because it's always been that way. Do you see what I'm getting at there? So that's a bit of a weird kind of thing to get into. It's going to be an interesting explainer for sure next season as to how Sylvester is even alive. So Icicle Jr., Cameron Marquand. I was hoping we would have got a lot more of him in season 2. I'm not going to lie. But they're definitely going to bring that home in season 3. So as for this, he's going to learn the truth of his father. Of course he will. Like, that is inherently obvious. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. The interesting thing is, a straight up villainous revenge thing for his father, that comes across as too cliche for me. Do you not agree? I feel like if he's just like, oh, I learned the truth of my father, I'm going to go after the JSA. That's such a straightforward, predictable storyline. Surely it can't be going there. So my prediction, in a very vague, ambiguous way, is that he will learn the truth. Of course he will. Like, of course he's going to learn the truth. But I think, to give Cameron some credit here, I like to think that he isn't his father's son necessarily, other than in powers. And that, yes, there may be a bit of resentment there to begin with, in this disdain for the girl he is low-key fallen in love with, or begun to fancy, so to speak. So there may be some initial angst there from Cameron, but I like to think that he's later to be redeemed before delving into too much villainy or villainous actions, because, as I keep repeating, that would just be way too obvious, a bit too straightforward for me. So I like to think that there's going to have to be some kind of confrontation, perhaps a reconciliation, but I want Cameron to be an interesting character rather than a straight up predictable villain who's just like, I'm gonna get vengeance. I get it, but no. Like, so obviously with this point, he's gonna come into his powers, he's gonna learn the truth. It's just what is yet to be decided from an audience perspective of where we can see this go. Is it really going to be predictable revenge, or is he going to be even more interesting than that? Who knows? He might even get sucked up in the whole Helix Institute for Youth Rehabilitation, because we can't forget Mr. Bones and everything we've discussed. He's taken a little bit of an interest in Blue Valley, so he's going to see some new youths to be rehabilitated, perhaps. Maybe Cameron could be one of them, but this is what I mean. We do not yet know how shady they're going to play Mr. Bones, because he isn't an outright villain. He even later on goes on to be the head of the DEO, in fact, so you see what I mean. But next up, ladies and gentlemen, is Solomon Grundy and Rickus. Rick, you know what I'm trying to say. So yes, next season, Rick, he still hasn't fixed his hourglass, so this is a cool tease in terms of not only him, but also Beth Chapel. We've got a couple of teases for these two characters of the JSA and how there is room for maybe a little bit of an improvement. So the hourglass, who knows? They could add some innovation here. It does risk alienating some people, because I do feel like if Rick did rebuild the hourglass with improvements, which you would think you would do, others, some purists, if you will, might be alienated in the sense that Hourman is meant to have his powers for 1 hour, because as articulated in the first season, he didn't want to be overpowered, so he would only be restrained to 1 hour. Some may call that like this noble thing to do. Some other fans may call that stupid and just be like, no man, trust yourself, have more than 1 hour. So what is Rick gonna do with reconstructing the hourglass? That is what is next for his character, and you just have to think there's gonna be some kind of upgrade there. And I don't know what else you could honestly do to upgrade it other than expand the time. So that is all I can think about with regards to that, but also he needs to revive Grundy from the hints and teases from the Shade himself. The Shade told him not to worry because Grundy has a way of coming back. So Rick will likely have to find the original resting place of Solomon Grundy, and not only that, guys, we've had teasers with Beth Chapel, which we're about to get onto, and Rick, but also Solomon Grundy himself, which could expand that storyline between Rick and Grundy to get a little bit more closer in a way of actual conversation. Now, why do I say that? That is because when Grundy often gets resurrected, you could say, because he's a freaking zombie, he can actually return different each time. So, for example, he can come back even more monstrous after being resurrected, but also he can come back with a bit of an enhanced intelligence up until a point of where he can even articulate. Right now, we only have friend or something like that, but maybe Grundy, once he comes back, they might utilize some of the source material stuff in where, as I just said, he comes back more monstrous sometimes, but other times he can actually come back with even more intelligence. His physical attributes and strength and meta powers, if you will, are always the same, but I feel like this would be a good way to offer Grundy a bit of a IQ spike so he can talk to his friend, which would be a pretty cool thing to explore, I think. I kept mentioning Beth Chapel, so this one's kind of a quick one. With her parents did tease a new suit in terms of, oh, you know, we've a yellow color scheme with nanotechnology. I'm abbreviating the line, but it's something like that. So I don't think they would have included that in there unless she was going to get some kind of upgrade. And I'm not going to lie, I like, it is a charming thing, Beth Chapel being like newbie in the Dr. Midnight suit, but you know, it's not quite what Stargirl did, where she literally redesigned it from Sylvester's armor. And then with Ted Grant's Wildcat suit, Yolanda, it literally adapted to her physique. And then with Our Man, well, you know, Rick's his father's son, he's wearing the stuff, he looks like Our Man. So Beth needs a bloody upgrade. And not only that, she needs an upgrade anyway. I love Beth Chapel as a character. I love her storyline with, obviously, Dr. Charles McNider, and that was very full circle, but people do offer criticism, which is very valid, in that, for example, if Rick hadn't saved her from those 2 crossbow bolts in the episode 6 fight scene, she would have just been like, whoa, and died. I know she did offer one self-defense little goggle mechanism thing, and that was to project those holograms out to Artemis of her parents with their mug shots, but other than that, she could have died, and she probably will die in future situations, similar to fights like this, which you have to think there will be future situations like that if you're in the frickin' JSA against villains. So one isn't crazy to think that someone needs to be trained a little bit. So not only that, but this goes back to the suit. It would be cool to get a little bit less of a dorky suit, even though I do like the charm, as I mentioned, that brought. I think next season could be a really awesome evolution for Beth Chapel. Not only in like a visual way, where she looks so much more badass with her new iteration of Dr. Midnight, but it would be really cool for Sylvester, since I'm guessing Charles is off with his new 10-year-old kid, which he didn't know about, to not only train Courtney, but the other GSA members in the ways of combat. Like, they do need some defense. I'm not trying to be critical for critical's sake. It's just, it's an obvious one which they do need to do. I need some superhero training next season for these kids. Because it goes without saying. And I believe that is mainly everything. I just wanted to ramble a bit and give my speculations on those big setup scenes and little goodies that we got from the end of season 2. They definitely did do a good job at setting up plenty of ideas for next season, and you know, us fans who are familiar with a little bit of where they could go could definitely spark some ideas for that. So I encourage you to spark your own ideas down in the comment section. Maybe you do have quite a bit to expand upon what I said and what I offered. I would love to see them, because I do read every single comment, so I will be checking. Also, let me know what you thought of what I had to say in general, but just like the video, guys, if you did enjoy this, make sure you are subscribed as well for future Stargirl videos, because of course we will be covering the season going into season 3 with any updates, you name it, castings, new characters. Check out the links in the top pinned comment for my Twitter, Discord server, and all good things like that. But thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you starlings in the next video. Goodbye.